All right. So welcome back, everyone, for another deep dive.
Yes, welcome back.
And today we're diving into a world that I think a lot of people only see in movies.
That's right.
We're talking about the UK prison system,
Yeah.
but we're not talking about some Hollywood thriller.
No.
We're going to be taking a look at a first-hand account from a diary
Right.
that was written by a white-collar prisoner during his sentence.
Yes, it's quite a fascinating read.
Oh, I bet.
It really is, and it was written by Will Phillips,
Okay.
and he's a singer-songwriter and events consultant.
Interesting.
Yeah, and he got a 4-year sentence at a place called HMPX.
Okay.
And what makes it even more fascinating is that he actually went in expecting a suspended sentence.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That must have been quite a shock to the system.
Absolutely, and you can really feel that in the diary entries.
I bet.
Especially the first day.
Right.
It's almost like an emotional roller coaster he's going through.
Yeah.
Going from this life that he was used to suddenly being in prison.
Right.
It's quite a contrast.
Yeah, and thinking about the psychological impact, too.
Absolutely.
Of that kind of drastic change.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So yeah, you can really get a sense of that in his writing.
And so he describes being transported in this really cramped, sweaty van
Right.
that he calls the sweatbox.
Right. Yeah.
And then when he finally gets to HMPX, he describes it
Yeah.
as this, like, almost horror movie-esque building.
It's quite vivid.
Really. So
Yeah.
it definitely kind of, like, shatters the myth
Yes.
that all prisons are like holiday camps.
Exactly. Exactly.
So it sounds like he's really painting a vivid picture here.
He is, yeah. And you know what's interesting?
What's that?
A lot of his descriptions of the conditions inside, the overcrowding, the sanitation, the lack of proper sanitation.
Right.
These are all things that have been documented in official reports about the UK prison system.
Oh, wow.
So these are, it's not just a personal experience he's describing. These are systemic issues that have been pointed out for years.
So he's kind of validating those
For sure.
in a way.
Precisely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, we will get into the nitty-gritty of what daily life was like for Will at HMPX.
Yeah.
But first, I want to touch on something that really struck me.
Okay.
In the early parts of the diary,
Yeah.
Will describes this almost immediate shift
Yes.
in both the guards
Yeah.
and the prisoners.
Right.
And he says that everyone just seems to fall into their roles
Yeah.
almost automatically.
Yeah.
And he even goes so far as to compare it to the Stanford Prison experiment.
That's a really interesting parallel.
It is.
And it kind of makes you think, even though the Stanford prison experiment was quite controversial,
Right.
it still gives us a lot of insights into how social roles work
Oh, interesting.
in these kinds of environments, right?
Yeah.
So just a quick recap for anyone who doesn't know.
Okay.
The Stanford prison experiment was basically a simulation.
Okay.
They set up this fake prison, and they had college students
Okay.
randomly assigned as either guards or prisoners.
Gotcha.
And the thing is, it had to be stopped early.
Oh.
Because the guards, they became so authoritarian,
Oh, wow.
and the prisoners started exhibiting signs of extreme stress and emotional breakdowns.
That's crazy
It is.
that it would happen that quickly.
It does, yeah.
Just from being assigned that role.
Yeah, and it really goes to show how our environment and the roles we're given really affect our behavior.
Wow, that is fascinating.
It is.
And kind of scary at the same time.
Yeah, it is.
That we can slip into these roles so easily.
And that's why I think it's so interesting that Will picked up on that in a real prison setting.
Yeah, so it's almost like even if you go into prison and you have this idea of like, I'm going to be myself,
Right.
the environment itself is almost pushing you to become
Exactly.
its predefined role.
It's a powerful force, yeah.
So that brings us to Will himself
Mm.
and how he dealt with this new reality.
Mm.
And I was really struck by his decision to refuse antidepressants
Yeah,
when they were offered to him.
yeah.
He seemed to lean really heavily on his writing and his music to cope.
Yeah, he talks about using them as outlets.
Right, and he even mentions this, like, strange visitation from an angel
Yes.
on his first night.
It's almost like these coping mechanisms are what
Yes.
helps him stay resilient.
Yeah.
Because, let's be honest, finding purpose and hope in that kind of environment, it's crucial. Right.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because this ties into a rather alarming statistic.
Oh.
Did you know that 40% of self-inflicted deaths in prison involve first-time prisoners?
Wow, I did not know that.
And most of these happen within the first 3 months.
Oh, wow.
So those early days are crucial, and it really shows how challenging it can be
Psychologically.
psychologically. Exactly.
To be confined like that.
Yeah,
So it really makes you wonder if more could be done to
absolutely.
support prisoners, especially in those first few months.
Especially then, yeah.
Yeah. When they're so vulnerable.
Because think about it, if they had more access to mental health services,
Right.
more creative outlets, meaningful activities,
Yeah,
that could make a world of difference
absolutely.
in helping them cope
Yeah,
and actually find a sense of purpose instead
mhm,
of, going down a darker path.
for sure.
So now I think it's time we actually dive into what a typical day
Yes.
was like for Will at HMPX,
Let's do it.
because he doesn't paint the prettiest picture.
Yeah.
From the food to the boredom,
Oh,
the noise, the tension.
oh boy.
It's not a walk in the park.
No, I can imagine.
Shall we start with the food?
Yeah, let's get that over with.
All right, well, Will actually wrote a little poem about the food.
Really?
He did.
A poem about prison food.
Yeah, it's quite funny, actually.
don't.
And it really sums up just how bland and repetitive the meals were.
I can imagine.
Think chips, potatoes, bread, and then more bread.
Ah,
Yeah, not very appetizing.
I don't think I could survive on that for 4 years.
I don't think many people could.
Yeah.
And it really speaks to the lack of attention to, well, basic nutrition
Right.
and the quality of life in the prison system.
Yeah.
So, yeah, the food is definitely something that stands out in his diary.
And beyond just the food, there's also the boredom
Yes.
that he talks about.
The crushing boredom.
Yeah, like hours upon hours in this cramped, dirty cell
Exactly.
with little to do.
And, this lack of meaningful activity.
Yeah,
It's a huge problem in prisons.
really.
Yeah.
I guess it makes sense.
Because without opportunities for education, work, anything creative,
Right.
prisoners are just left with all this time and nothing to do with it.
Right, and that just breeds frustration,
Exactly.
despair,
Yeah,
maybe even aggression.
exactly. It's like a cycle that doesn't really help anyone.
No, it definitely doesn't sound like it's conducive to positive change.
Not at all.
Now, Will does mention that he actually went out of his way
He did.
to make his time productive.
Yes.
So he pursued educational opportunities.
Yeah, he did.
Got involved with music programs.
He even became a listener.
Oh, a listener.
Yeah, which is someone who's trained to provide emotional support to other inmates.
Oh, wow. So he was actively trying to, improve himself
Absolutely.
and help others as well.
It's quite remarkable,
It is.
especially given the circumstances.
Yeah.
And you know what he actually wrote in his diary?
What's that?
He said, "I would find it impossible to achieve so much so fast if I were free."
Wow. So it's almost like the restricted environment
Right.
helped him to be more productive.
It's an interesting thought, isn't it?
It is.
Like maybe sometimes having fewer choices, fewer distractions, it
Yeah,
can
yeah.
actually help you focus.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Of course, this doesn't apply to everyone,
No, of course not.
but it's just an interesting observation that Will made.
Yeah, and he's a pretty good storyteller by the sound of it.
He is.
He seems to have a good eye for detail.
And a sense of humor.
Yeah, because he also mentions all these other characters
Oh,
he
yeah.
meets inside.
Cast of characters.
Yeah, like Seabass, his cellmate,
Ah, here.
who apparently just fully embraced all the negativity
Yeah, she did.
and just resisted any sort of self-improvement.
He was quite content with his situation.
Wow, really?
Yeah,
So there's a real contrast there between Will and Seabass.
definitely.
And he describes Seabass with such wit, it's hilarious.
He does, yeah.
And then there's Shuey,
The ex-Olympian boxer.
yeah, and Chad, the prison mastermind.
Oh, Chad.
And I won't even get into the story about Kid Curry.
Oh, no.
Let's just say it involves some questionable culinary practices.
Right.
So he's really painting a picture
He is.
of all these different
A real
characters.
cast of characters.
Yeah, so it's not just about his own experience.
No.
It's about all these other people.
It's like a microcosm of society.
Right, but inside this very specific environment.
Exactly. With its own rules and hierarchies.
And obviously, all these relationships, like you were saying before,
Yeah.
with these characters, they can really affect a prisoner's well-being.
Absolutely.
It's so interesting.
It is.
Now, as funny as these descriptions are, and as witty as he is,
Yes.
Will doesn't shy away from the darker side of prison either.
No, he doesn't.
He does talk about witnessing violence.
Yes.
He talks about hearing about suicides
You're right.
and even experiencing harassment from some of the guards himself.
It's that honesty that makes his account so valuable.
Yeah.
He doesn't try to sugarcoat the experience.
No.
He really makes us confront the reality of what prison is like.
Yeah. And he's also not afraid to criticize the system itself.
No, he isn't.
He questions the effectiveness of rehabilitation programs,
Yes.
harshness of sentencing guidelines,
Yeah.
and even the logic behind keeping certain types of offenders incarcerated.
He questions a lot of things.
He does.
And I think that's important
Yeah.
because he's sparking a conversation about the purpose of prisons, you know?
Right.
What are they for?
Are they for punishment?
Rehabilitation.
Both.
Both.
Or are they actually achieving their goals?
These are all big questions.
They are.
And I think, you know, Will's experience, his perspective,
Yeah.
it forces us to think about these things in a deeper way.
Yeah. And it doesn't sound like there are any easy answers.
No, there aren't.
No.
But at least, you know, his diary gives us a starting point
Yeah, definitely.
for a more meaningful discussion about the UK prison system.
And Will's journey doesn't actually end at HMPX.
No, it doesn't.
He's eventually transferred to an open prison,
That's right.
which is a whole other environment
Completely different.
with its own unique challenges.
And that's what we'll be exploring in part 2 of this deep dive.
Okay, great.
We're going to delve into the world of HMPY,
Awesome.
this seemingly idyllic setting with a much darker undercurrent.
I'm intrigued already.
And we'll see how Will navigates this new phase of his incarceration.
Can't wait.
So stay tuned for that. So we're back
Back again.
for part 2
Part 2.
of our deep dive into Will Phillips' prison diary.
Yes.
And we left off with Will at the gates of HMPY,
Right.
an open prison that almost seemed like
Yeah.
a world away from the harsh realities of HMPX.
He described it as Disney World for convicts,
Yeah, he did.
which is, I mean, that's quite a contrast
It is, yeah.
to what we were talking about in the first part.
And what's really fascinating about this transition is that it's not just a change in the environment. It's also this shift in Will's mindset.
Okay.
It's almost like a test of his ability
To adapt
to adapt, yeah.
to this whole new system.
Yeah, and this new system is almost even more demanding psychologically.
Really?
Yeah.
I wouldn't have thought that.
You would think it would be easier.
Yeah, because he mentions, like, the beautiful grounds and more freedom.
He does, yeah.
But he also talks about this, like, unsettling undercurrent.
He does.
Like, he's surrounded by lifers and people who have committed some pretty serious crimes.
That's right. And he even jokes
Oh.
that his wing is like a mix of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and The Shining.
Oh, wow. Okay, so,
What a dark humor there.
yeah. So it's not all sunshine and roses then.
No, not exactly.
Which makes me wonder, what is the point of an open prison?
That's a good question.
Like, what's the purpose?
Well, the idea is to prepare inmates for release.
Right.
But the thing is, they also house these people.
Who may never get out.
Exactly. So it's a bit of a contradiction.
It is, yeah.
And Will's diary entries really reflect
That tension.
that tension, yeah.
So how does he handle it?
Well, on the one hand, he seems to really relish the freedoms.
Okay.
He can wear his own clothes. He has more control over his time.
Right.
But there's also this unease.
Because of who he's surrounded by.
Exactly.
And the nature of their crimes.
He describes it as this constant balancing act.
Between appreciating the comforts
Yeah,
and acknowledging that underlying tension.
that's a good way to put it, yeah.
Okay, so he's definitely more aware of his surroundings.
Much more so.
And he's not just taking it all at face value.
No, he's thinking critically about it.
Now, being Will, he can't help but describe the characters he meets
Oh, of course.
at HMPY as well.
There's always a new cast of characters.
Always.
Right.
Right.
Like Blind Dave, who accidentally strangled the wrong person.
My goodness.
Or Forklift Dave,
Forklift Dave.
who specifically requested a transfer to HMPY because they had a forklift driver's course, which ended up being canceled.
So,
Can you imagine?
that's a prison system letdown if I ever heard one.
It really is.
So, I mean, it's funny, but
Yeah.
it also kind of highlights that the system isn't always
No,
what it's cracked up to be.
not at all. And it's often quite arbitrary.
Right. Things don't always make sense.
Exactly.
Okay, so despite all of this, does Will still try to make his time meaningful,
He does, yeah.
like he did at HMPX?
Yeah, he becomes a peer mentor.
Oh, wow. He teaches English and math to other inmates.
That's great.
He even gets involved in this reading program called Toe by Toe.
Toe by toe.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think it really shows his resilience and his empathy.
Yeah.
Because he could easily just focus on his own situation.
Right.
But he's actively trying to help others.
And he's still finding solace in music?
Oh, absolutely. He keeps writing songs.
Okay.
He plays in the prison rock band.
Cool.
He even performs at a concert in the chapel.
So music is still a big part of his life.
It's his outlet.
Yeah.
It gives him purpose.
Right.
And it reminds him of who he is beyond just being an inmate.
But it's not all easy going, right?
No, it's
He's still struggling.
He is
The emotional toll
Yeah.
of being incarcerated.
His relationship with Kitty is strained.
Right.
He feels like he's losing himself.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And you can really feel that in his diary entries during this time.
Okay.
They become much more introspective,
Yeah.
more vulnerable. He's letting his guard down.
He is, yeah. And you see his self-doubt
The pain of being separated
from loved ones.
from Kitty.
Yeah, and it's a reminder that imprisonment doesn't just affect the individual.
No,
It affects families.
everyone around them.
Yeah,
It ripples outwards.
it does.
So how does he cope with all of this?
Well, he writes about feeling like a hamster on a wheel,
Oh, wow.
running and running, but getting nowhere.
And he starts to question
Yeah,
if Kitty will even be there.
when he gets out.
Yeah, he's thinking about the future.
He is, and then comes the news
Oh.
that his appeal has been denied.
Oh.
So he's going to serve the full 4 years.
That must have been devastating.
It was a real turning point in the diary.
Yeah.
The hope for early release is gone.
Right.
So he has to face the reality of his situation.
And find a new way to cope.
Exactly.
Does he manage?
He does.
Right.
Through his writing, his music, his teaching.
So the things that were already helping.
Yeah, they become even more important.
Mm.
And he starts to reflect on the lessons he's learned.
Oh, like what?
The importance of perseverance, respect,
Oh,
finding the good in others, even in a place like prison.
it's powerful.
It is. And, he still finds moments of humor.
Oh, good.
Like when he describes the prison's Christmas decorations
Mhm.
as looking like a drunken elf vomited tinsel all over the place.
Oh, Will.
That's our Will.
Never change.
But he's also honest about the toll it's taking.
Yeah.
He talks about feeling like he's crawling through darkness.
Hoping for some light.
Yeah, and he's starting to question the system even more.
Oh, how so?
He sees the inconsistencies,
Okay.
the absurdities,
Right.
the way prisoners are treated.
Like they're less than human.
Exactly. And he
Yeah.
reads this report
Oh, okay.
that refers to prisoners as rubbish.
Oh, wow.
And it really affects him.
I bet.
It's like a punch in the gut.
Yeah.
Because it's dehumanizing.
It is. And his insights are really powerful.
They are.
Because he's not just complaining.
No.
He's offering a critique
Of the system.
of the whole UK prison system.
Based on what he's seeing firsthand.
So it's not just theoretical for him.
No, it's his reality.
So as his sentence continues, he starts to think about release,
He does.
about going home.
He looks forward to home leave.
Okay.
Down visits.
Simple things.
Yeah, like having pockets in his trousers again.
Oh, wow. Yeah,
It's the little things.
it is.
But he also knows that going back won't be easy. He's changed.
The world outside has changed.
Right, and he even writes this line.
Oh,
It's only after we've lost everything that we're free to do anything.
where's that from?
It's from Fight Club.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I remember that.
And I think it really captures...
That mix of emotions.
Yeah, the loss, the liberation.
What uncertainty.
Exactly.
What comes next.
And as Will gets closer to the 300-day mark of his sentence,
Okay.
that tension between hope and despair just keeps building.
And that's where we'll pick up
In the final part.
of our deep dive.
Into Will's story.
All right, so we're back for the final part
The final chapter.
of our deep dive into Will Phillips' prison diary.
It's been quite a journey.
It has, from HMPX to the open prison HMPY.
Yeah, and in these final entries, we see Will's perspective kind of shift.
Oh, how so?
He becomes less focused on his own experiences and starts to look at the prison system as a whole.
Okay, so he's taking a step back.
He is, and he's really analyzing it, critiquing its flaws, questioning its purpose.
He's almost like an investigative journalist,
Yeah, a bit like that.
looking at the interactions, the programs, the impact of budget cuts.
He's seeing the bigger picture.
And what are some of his key observations?
Well, one thing that really struck me was his take on short sentences.
Okay, what does he say about those?
He's not a fan.
Really? Why not?
He believes they're ineffective, actually.
Effective.
Yeah, he argues that they're a waste of resources and often do more harm than good.
So what's the alternative?
He suggests that community service or other alternatives would be more beneficial for certain types of offenders.
So not everyone needs to be locked up.
That's his point, yeah.
You could see that.
And it's interesting because he noticed that this constant influx and outflow of short-term prisoners, it really disrupted the stability of the prison environment.
Ah, I see. So it makes it harder
Yeah, harder for those serving longer sentences to really focus on rehab.
to actually change.
Exactly. And it also contributes to that cycle of recidivism.
So the system is almost working against itself.
In a way, yeah.
That's a really interesting point.
And then there's his experience with education in prison.
Oh, what happened there?
Well, he was initially denied access to an open university course
Why?
because it wasn't considered academic enough.
Seriously.
Yeah, but then later on, he was allowed to teach English to other inmates.
That seems contradictory.
It is, and it highlights this lack of clarity within the system about what rehabilitation actually means.
Right, like what are they actually trying to achieve?
Exactly, and how do they measure success?
It sounds like there are some big questions that need to be addressed.
Absolutely, and Will's diary is prompting us to ask those questions.
Now, he does mention one program that he found really impactful.
Oh, yes, the community cookery program.
To widowers.
That's the one, and he called it one of the most rewarding experiences of his entire sentence.
Wow, really? What was it about that program?
I think it gave him a sense of purpose to be contributing to society even while he was incarcerated.
Right, and it's preparing them for release, too.
Exactly, and it shows that even in this restricted environment,
You can still make a difference.
you can, and Will is a testament to that.
He really is, but he's also realistic about the challenges of reintegration.
Of course, he knows he's changed. The world has changed.
He worries about rebuilding his life.
Finding work, getting back on his feet.
And what about Kitty?
Yeah, he's worried about their relationship.
I bet.
And his entries become so raw and honest as he deals with these anxieties.
You can really feel the weight of it all.
Yeah, his vulnerability, his fear of the unknown.
It's heavy stuff.
It is, but even in these moments of despair,
There's still humor,
always, that's Will.
like a coping mechanism.
Exactly, it's how he keeps himself sane.
And he finishes that song.
How are you gonna see me now?
The ballad about his anxieties about going back to Kitty.
Yeah, it's a powerful song.
It is a real testament to his creativity.
And his resilience.
He's not letting his circumstances define him.
No, he's not.
So in his final entry, what does he say?
He reflects on the lessons he's learned.
Oh, like what?
Perseverance, compassion, the importance of appreciating the simple things.
The things we often take for granted.
Exactly.
He's definitely gained a new perspective.
He has, and he acknowledges the scars.
But also the growth.
Yeah, it's a bittersweet ending.
It is, and it leaves us with a lot to think about.
About the purpose of prison, about creating a more just system.
About breaking the cycle of recidivism.
Yeah, and supporting rehabilitation.
It's call to action.
It is.
To really examine our assumptions about the prison system.
And to consider the need for change.
Will's story has certainly given me a lot to think about.
Me too, and I hope it has for our listeners as well.
It's a conversation that needs to continue.
Absolutely.
Beyond this deep dive.
Will's diary has given us a glimpse into a world we don't often see.
And it reminds us that behind the statistics are real people.
Whose lives are profoundly affected by incarceration.
So thank you for joining us on this journey.
We hope you found it as insightful and thought-provoking as we did.
And if this topic has sparked your interest, we encourage you to learn more.
There's so much information out there about the UK prison system and the debate around its role in society.
So keep diving deeper, and we'll see you next time.
See you then.